morning. Continuing our theme of nature, we're going to be talking today about birds. Now, birds are pretty cool in their own right. They're also really important to us and as a part of the ecosystem. They're integral parts of the food chain. Um, one thing birds do is some birds eat insects. And think about there's think about all the insects that would be around if birds weren't there to eat them. So they play a role in that way. And they're also a natural way to control pests in gardens and on farms and in other places. Um, a group of birds gliding through the air can easily eat hundreds of insects each day. And insect-eating birds include warblers and bluebirds and woodpeckers and others. And woodpeckers, because that's what they're going for when they're pecking at the trees, creating those holes in the trees. They're going after bugs. Some birds drink nectar from flowers. And these birds are important for pollinating the flowers because they move the pollen as they drink from each flower. They pick up pollen and they move it, go to drink from another flower, and they move that pollen around to different flowers. And this helps fertilize the different flowers, and this is what allows the flowers to reproduce and create new flowers. So without those pollinator birds, those flowers wouldn't be able to survive. And these birds include hummingbirds, of course, and also things we don't see around here, but sunbirds and honey eaters. These are common pollinators. Around here, the most common ones you see are the hummingbirds. Some birds, they don't eat insects, they don't drink nectar, they eat mostly fruit. And these also help in reproduction for plants that produce fruit, because after eating the fruit, the birds carry the seeds in their intestines and fly somewhere else and deposit the seeds in a new location. And then those new fruit-bearing plants can grow somewhere else. And fruit-eating birds include mockingbirds and orioles, finches, robins, so many birds that we see around here. And there's other ways birds are important too. In science, they have acted as an inspiration for people in science. So from the technology of flight, airplane wings are based on the shape of bird wings. Zippers came about because of what someone saw in the feathers, how feathers attach. So humans have been drawing inspiration from birds for centuries. And some of these advances have been huge. So Darwin's study of finches in the Galapagos proved instrumental in shaping his thoughts on the evolution through natural selection. The birds play a more important role than just giving us ideas. They are also messengers that can tell us about the health of the planet. Birds are widespread and respond really quickly to changes in the environment. So because of this, they can act as an early warning system for any pressing concerns, such as climate change. So if something's happening to the birds, it's sort of an early sign that there might be something else going on that could harm us or the whole ecosystem. Birds can also just inspire us in general. It's just so pleasant looking at them, watching them fly in the air. Who doesn't like to see that? And that's why many people have put bird feeders in their yards, as I do, so to watch the birds, because they're just wonderful. And I was pleased when my tenants also enjoy the birds, and they have been filling my feeders this summer. So I'm glad for my birds. They'll have that seed this summer, and then my tenants can enjoy them. So birds are inspirational to people. Drew Lanham is a very famous ornithologist, and there's a quote of his that I really like along these lines. I worship every bird that I see, and wildness is a wayward weed, but it's also worthy of adoration and worship. So each time I see in those things that are flying, that are wild and free, I see a bit of me in that. And then that whole creation story my grandmother used to tell me about, I become a part of that, and I get to evolve through it. So with all these ways that birds are important to us and important to the ecosystem, it's really sad that on the East Coast right now, there's a mysterious disease running through bird populations. And it started this year in sort of late spring. And it's started out in Washington, D.C., and at least 12 other states along the eastern coast, from Connecticut down to Florida. So we haven't seen it so much in Maine. But just below us, it's pretty widespread. And it's in the midst of a songbird epidemic. Thousands of young birds, including blue jays and common grackles, robins, starlings, are suddenly going blind, and they have oozing from their eyes, and then they get all shaky, and then they die. Lab tests have ruled out some possible causes. They're thinking it would be West Nile virus or avian influenza, but it's not any of those. So scientists haven't been able to figure out what's going on with these birds and why they're dying. And what makes it really remarkable is just the significant number of birds that have been ill or died. And also a really large number of species have been impacted. So now the cases are beginning to decrease in some areas. So that's a good sign. But it's still pretty important to figure out the cause of this. Because if it's a human-linked toxin, we want to do something about that. If it's an infectious disease that's running through the birds, it would be a good idea to get that out to the public, because bird feeders, as wonderful as they are, they can be a way of spreading disease through avian populations, through bird populations. So if there's some disease, we need to know that so that people can start either washing their feeders or not using them. You should wash your feeders no matter what. I don't wash mine. But if you have a bird feeder, make sure you wash it at least once a week. So we're starting to see some healthy young blue jays and starlings, and these were the species most hard hit by the illness. So that's a good sign, and this was around DC. So it's encouraging, but we may never know what caused the disease. And also, I was saying earlier, birds can be early indicators of something else going on in the environment that could eventually help harm us and the whole ecosystem. So hopefully they can figure out what's going on. And if not, if they can't figure it out, well, we'll just have to hope that the decreasing case continue. So today we're going to read a story about birds. It's called Counting Birds, and it is by Heidi Stempel. Her mother was also a author and published some books, and her father, the author's father, was really into owls, and he'd take them out when she was a kid. Her dad would take her out at night to listen to the owls. So here is the story. Frank Chapman loved birds. He worked at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, creating exhibits about birds. He wrote books and magazine articles about birds. He studied birds' habitats and habits. He read the research of John James Audubon, the most famous ornithologist of all times. Frank Chapman loved birds. In 1899, he began his own magazine called Birdlore. Every 2 months, Birdlore was published and read by other bird lovers. Around this time, Americans were starting to think about the natural world around them. First scientists and poets, then government leaders, and finally, more and more regular citizens were starting to talk about conservation. How could they better live in their world? How could they save the wilderness that was disappearing, the forests that were being cut down, the waterways that were being polluted, and the animals and birds that were being overhunted? But not everyone cared about conservation. On Christmas Day, sports hunters would gather, choose teams, and hold a bird competition. All day long, the hunters looked for birds. Large birds, small birds, all birds were game. At the end of the day, the birds were counted. The winning team was the side that had shot and killed the most birds. Frank Chapman did not love this tradition. In the pages of his magazine, he set out to stop it. In his magazine, he said, Now, Birdlore proposes a new kind of Christmas side hunt in the form of a Christmas bird census, and we hope that all our readers who have the opportunity will aid us in making it a success by spending a portion of Christmas Day with the birds and sending a report of their hunt to Birdlore before they retire for the night. Count them, he proposed. Don't kill them. That first year, on Christmas Day, 1900, 27 birdwatchers in 25 locations from Connecticut to California counted common loons and killdeer, winter wrens, and red-winged blackbirds. They observed hermit thrushes, barred owls, Carolina chickadees, fish crows, turkey vultures, and spotted and canyon towhees. In all, Birdlore proudly reported close to 18,500 birds from 89 different species. Not one bird was killed. That first count was not the last. Every year in December, more people join the count. Every year, more areas are added. And every year, more and more birds are counted in every corner of the United States, as well as Canada, Mexico, and other countries across the world. The owlers are the first ones into the field. They climb out of their warm beds at midnight and call down owls in the dark. By the light of the moon, they raise their hands to their mouths and whistle. They use recordings of real owls to hoot. They wait and listen. When an owl calls back, the owlers mark their maps and move on to the next spot. When the sun starts to rise, so do fresh birders who arrive to take over. Some owlers say goodnight, and some keep counting. All day long, groups observe and take notes in count circles. Sandwich terns and song sparrows, creepers, thrashers, bufflehead, brant, and bobwhites. All birds are welcome. Not all bird watchers are in the field. Some count the birds that visit their backyard feeders. All birders are welcome. At the end of the day, the birders collect their notes and add their numbers. Later, the National Audubon Society will compile all the data and learn many things. How climate change affects birds' populations, which species are in trouble, what areas need conservation help. The birders know this is important for science, but that night, what is really important to them is their stories. Who found the most owls? Which birds were spotted? What records were broken? The Audubon Christmas bird count has become the longest running citizen science project and wildlife census in the world. Everyone wins, the birds, the birders, and science. And all this because Frank Chapman loved birds. And that is a story, Counting Birds. There is more information at the back of the book about ways that you can get involved and ways that you can do a Christmas bird count. And if you're interested in the Christmas bird count, you can go to the National Audubon Society website, which is www.audubon.org. You can find it easily enough. And the other story I almost read to you today was about how the how the National Audubon Society started. It was in Massachusetts, and there was women that were concerned about birds being used as a part of a style for women's hats. It'd be basically like dead birds on women's hats. And the feathers that were being collected, people would kill the birds for their feathers that were also often used for women's hats. And it was a big driver, just these hats were a big driver in why a lot of birds were getting killed. So these women set out to do something about it, and they did, and they had legislation passed that stopped this from happening. And that's what started the Massachusetts Audubon Society, which then expanded across the country. So that's a great story too. So that is all for today. I do encourage you to get out there, and if you don't do the Christmas bird count, at least get out, look a little bit around at the birds a little more, and see if you can maybe find one that you hear the song of and see if you can identify it, or if you see a bird that you don't recognize, maybe go look it up and see what it is, because it's pretty and it's beautiful. So that's all for this week. Be kind to yourselves as well as to others, and I will see you next time.